I want to begin this study a little differently by showing you a home video. It's more than 20 years old and it captures a moment that is deeply personal to me. It's when my daughter McKenna, she was 5, and she was absolutely obsessed with horses. So we packed up and made a long drive from the Front Range all the way across the state of Colorado to Little Book Cliff's wild horse area. It wasn't just a road trip, it was a complete adventure. And we brought a video camera and recorded the whole experience, not knowing at the time how meaningful it would become. So just bear with me here and watch this with me now.
Where are we going?
To see wild horses.
Oh boy!
Wild horses, here we come.
Well, we can't find any horses yet. Ooh, yeah, that might be one. Need to find these horsies, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go see if we can find.
I heard that another gallop.
You heard another gallop?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It went like this. I heard it, and it went like this. The boom.
Yeah.
It went like that. Did you hear it?
I don't know. Have we seen any horses yet? Where are you, horses? McKenna, what are you looking at? Wild horses? There they are. McKenna! What's right over there?
Wild horses.
Which one's your favorite, McKenna?
That white limb silver on his face.
That's your favorite.
Bye, horsey. Bye, horsey.
So question, how much do I love this little cowgirl? I mean, she's all grown up now, but I still see her as 5. Well, how much do I love her? Well, how much more does the Lord love her? And if he loves her that deeply, it means, according to what we've been reading in Genesis, that God too is patiently at work, forming her, shaping her, and yes, even breaking her in the truest sense, not to harm her, but to make her strong, free, and fully his. I share this because you really need to catch my heart for my daughter to understand what I'm getting at. Because McKenna, she's actually an exceptional artist. Not because her work would impress a gallery, but because it's hers. As we talked about last time, I would rather hang her artwork in my office than $1 million Picasso. Take this piece from a young 5-year-old McKenna, created in the classic crayon medium. Notice the subtle shading, the confident loops that bring texture to the horse's mane and tail, and of course the artist's very generous interpretation of the horse's body length. Well, now compare that to another interpretation of horses. This is called Large Blue Horses from 1911 by Franz Marc. Well, Marc believed horses symbolize purity, strength, and a world untouched by corruption. Well, the value of this painting, it isn't driven by the technical detail or realism. It's driven entirely by who painted it. In fact, as Marc's work goes, this one is relatively inexpensive. It's sold for a bargain price of just $15 million. While many of his other paintings, they sell north of $50 to $100 million. So, which is the better piece of art? Well, obviously Marc's. I mean, even I'm not a big fan of modern art, have to admit that those who know, they know it's worth millions. But which one do I love? Well, obviously it's McKenna's, because she's my little cowgirl princess. I love her. She means more to me than any $1 million painting. So even though her artwork might fall short in the eyes of others, to me, even her imperfect efforts matter deeply. And that didn't stop with crayons. When she failed as she grew, when she lied, when she cheated, when she fought with her brothers, when she talked back to her mom. Well, as her father, I used the consequences of those foolish choices not to reject her, but to teach her, to shape her, and to form her heart and character. And that's exactly what we're about to see as we move into Genesis chapters 30 and 31. Because my heart as a father toward my daughter is only a faint reflection of our Heavenly Father's heart towards us. When we mess up, we sin. We rely on worldly strategies and advice and empty societal remedies to manipulate our circumstances. We're certainly not perfect, and we fail. But we don't have to be perfect. He still loves us. He sees our hearts, imperfections and all, and He works with what we bring to Him to accomplish something incredible. So even when our efforts are a little off target, which leads to what we're going to learn from this passage, it's that God can use flawed attempts and strategies to shape our hearts and accomplish His will. So picking up where we left off last time in Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." So Jacob, he's lived with Laban for 20 years. 7 of those years were spent earning the right to marry Rachel, only to be deceived into marrying Leah. And then came another 7 years of service to finally gain Rachel as his second wife. But notice this, Jacob could have left after 14 years, but he stayed. And now it's been 20. So why now? Why is he going to leave now? Well, the answer doesn't come immediately. We don't discover that answer until the next chapter when Jacob finally explains to his wives why he's leaving. He tells them about something God said to him back during breeding season when the Lord made His will unmistakably clear. We find this out in chapter 31, verse 13. "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, and where you have made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land." So I'm going to be honest, this is not an easy passage. But obedience is going to be the lens through which we need to view Jacob's actions. At the end of the day, he's trying to obey God and return to Canaan. Jacob, however, he's kind of like a horse nearing the end of a breaking process. He's learning, but he's not finished. Sometimes he obeys, sometimes he kicks, sometimes he moves forward in quiet trust, and other times he acts as though God isn't enough and tries to fill in the gaps himself. It's imperfect obedience, but it's still obedience in process. Verse 27. But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I'll pay them." It's like, oh, Uncle Laban, divination? So divination means Laban didn't just figure this out. He went to a spiritist to discover why his wealth had exploded. And the answer he got was clear. It was because of Jacob. Now, what kind of divination are we talking about? Now, we're familiar with things like tarot cards or tea leaves or fortune tellers, but in the ancient world, they used all kinds of strange and really disturbing methods to seek supernatural insight. And you might say, wait, wouldn't a spiritist really know that? I mean, would they know about Jacob? And it's like, oh yes, absolutely. The spirits Laban consulted, the demons whispering in his ears, had no interest whatsoever in Jacob returning to the land of promise. They knew exactly what was at stake here, and they would do anything they could to reveal and twist or manipulate to keep God's purposes from moving forward, and God's purposes were to move Jacob back to Canaan. Verse 29, Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock is fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when I may do something for my own household?" What we're watching here is, think of this as two Bedouin leaders negotiating. And Jacob he's laying out his case. He makes one thing clear. It wasn't divination. And it certainly wasn't demons that brought blessing to Laban's household. It was the Lord, Yahweh. Laban is finally coming to terms with the truth that Jacob represents. Jacob was the source of his prosperity. Wherever Jacob went, the blessing of God followed. And now Jacob will propose a solution, a negotiated compromise, one that moves the story forward and sets the stage for what comes next. Verse 31, "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages." Speckled, spotted, or streaked sheep, the less valuable? Well, where did Jacob get this idea? Well, as we move into the next chapter, we discover the answer. It didn't come from clever breeding tricks or ancient superstition. It came from a vision God had sent him. Look at chapter 31, starting in verse 10. "In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, 'Jacob.' I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flocks are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land.'" So what looks odd or even manipulative at first is actually rooted in divine instruction revealed to Jacob by God himself. God was showing Jacob how he intended to bless him by giving him the streaked, speckled, or spotted sheep as a direct response to all the rotten stuff Laban had done to him. This is Jacob, and he's trying to obey God. It's messy. It's imperfect. It doesn't stay neatly inside the lines, but his heart is moving in the right direction. He's attempting to obey God's call to return to Canaan. And this proposed deal, in his way of finally being able to walk away with wages from Laban and step into what God has promised, is the way. Well, obviously, Jacob's actions, they're not going to be perfect, but that doesn't limit God, because God can use flawed attempts and strategies to shape our hearts and accomplish his will. Verse 33, "And my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark colored, will be considered stolen." The irony here is pretty thick. What does Jacob base this deal on? His honesty. Jacob, his honesty. Isn't that Jacob's most glaring flaw? And yet to Uncle Laban, it sounds like a perfectly fair deal. Why? Because Jacob does all the work and Laban keeps the vast majority of the flocks. Speckled, spotted, and streaked sheep, they're rare. So in Laban's mind, this was a no-lose situation. Convinced he couldn't lose, Laban quickly closes the deal in verse 34. "Agreed," said Laban. Let it be as you have said. What's almost hilarious here is who these two men are. Remember Uncle Laban? He's the mirror image of Jacob. I mean, they're cut from the same cloth. In the moment the deal is struck, both of them, they both get to work, each trying to make sure he ends up with the better side of the bargain. Laban, he's convinced he's won because Jacob only gets the rare sheep. Jacob is convinced he's won because God promised to bless him, and he's more than willing to act in his own strength to make sure that God blesses him and that comes to pass. And then Laban does what Laban does best. He starts cheating immediately in verse 35. That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Dear old Uncle Laban is cheating again. He agreed to give all the spotted sheep to Jacob, but instead he quietly keeps them for himself by handing them off to his sons. In his mind, he's outsmarted Jacob, leaving him with nothing but solid-colored sheep that surely won't produce offspring that are streaked, spotted, speckled, or dark. And just to be safe, to make sure no sheep hanky-panky happens, he puts a 3-day journey between his spotted flocks and Jacob's solid-colored ones. Uncle Laban, he's a real jerk, and so is Jacob. Just because Jacob is trying to obey God doesn't mean he's fully broken yet. He's still a work in progress. And he's about to cheat a little bit too. Again, Jacob won't act perfectly here. But remember, his heart, it's set on obeying God by returning to the land of promise. He just tries to make it happen through flawed practices. And here's that key, that God can even use flawed attempts and imperfect strategies to shape our hearts and still accomplish his will. As we come to verse 37 and beyond, there's a subtle but brilliant irony at work here. And it all hinges on the name, the Hebrew name Laban, which it literally means white. And once you see that, the passage lights up. The repeated emphasis on white branches and white sheep. It's not accidental. It's setting the trap. Look at Laban. Laban, white, is obsessed with control. He's trying to keep the flocks pure, predictable, and manageable. But God uses white rods to quietly unravel Laban, which means white, manipulation. Out of Laban's white, God produces variety, increase, and blessing, not for Laban, but for Jacob. In other words, the very thing Laban trusts in, his whiteness, becomes the means of his loss. Laban thinks he's securing the future through deception and control. But God turns Laban's name, his strategy, and even his environment against him. You can scheme all you want, but God is still the one writing the story. So with that in mind, read verse 37. Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they mated in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Now I know you might be thinking, what on earth is going on here? I mean, strips of white bark cut into branches and set in watering troughs, and somehow that's supposed to produce spots and streaks and speckles in the sheep? That sounds less like science and more like an ancient Bedouin wives' tale. And guess what? It was. The Bible doesn't bend the story to protect our sensibilities. It doesn't say what we want it to say. It simply records what happened. And it's obvious Jacob's actions, they are not perfect, but he's trying to obey. He's just a little bit off target. Remember, Jacob is a wild horse near the end of the breaking process. He's mostly responsive, but not fully surrendered yet. He still hasn't learned to trust the Lord completely. So he keeps reaching for his own methods, even as God is leading him forward. Remember what we learned when we read chapter 31, that God simply told Jacob how he would bless him? Nowhere does God tell Jacob to use some type of folk medicine or selective breeding process to make it happen. That part, that's all Jacob. It's flawed human effort layered on top of divine promise. The simplest explanation for this difficult section of Scripture is this: is that Jacob is using the folk customs, the wives' tales, and cultural methods of his day to accomplish what God had already promised him through a vision. And even though it's far from perfect, God knows Jacob's heart is still to obey. And God can still use flawed attempts and strategies to shape our hearts and accomplish his will. Verse 40, Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so that they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and females and male servants and camels and donkeys. You can call it selective breeding or manipulation or cheating, but one thing is clear: it was working. Suddenly, all the flocks Jacob was overseeing for Laban started to look something like this. All the sheep that were being born were spotted, dark-colored, or speckled, thus belonging to Jacob according to his agreement with Laban. And this is where we come face to face with the problem of imperfect obedience. Yes, God can and does bless imperfect obedience. But when it works, who gets the credit? Our worldly methods or the Lord? And that's why we have to be careful about depending too heavily on strategies and our own plans to accomplish what we believe is God's will. It becomes a kind of balance scale. Our strategies on one side, the Lord on the other. And when it works, when there are results, who gets the credit? Was it our human strategy, our effort, our methodology, or was it the Lord? Yes, the Lord can use our flawed attempts, but things can get messy. They get hazy, and before long the results are polluted by human effort, with God's wonder slowly being tainted by our human longing to take all the credit. Well, chapter 31, Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. Well, duh. Of course Laban's attitude has changed. He's a deal maker, and this deal is going south fast. And now Jacob has a problem. He can't say with a clear conscience, "Hey, Laban, I didn't cheat. I mean, this was purely God's hand." Why? Because he used flawed human methods to manipulate the circumstances for his own benefit, instead of fully relying upon God's power to bring it about. He used his culture's methods to tip the scales towards strategy. Do you want to know a question that genuinely keeps me up at night as a pastor? It's this: is what's happening at Church on the Hill the result of God's power or good strategy? You know, our church has been growing, significantly. And that forces an honest question. Is that growth driven by strong human effort or by the power of God? Because history shows us something absolutely sobering. What begins as a movement of the Spirit often drifts into an endeavor of man. And I don't want to give my life to building something that's merely human. I want to be part of what God is doing. So is it God or good strategy? Well, my prayer as the lead pastor here is simple and deeply personal. God, you work. I'll get out of the way. I don't want to manufacture results. I want to be a conduit of your Holy Spirit's power to grip hearts and transform lives. Whatever you call me to do, that's what I'll do. I will surrender and obey. And that's the secret to tipping the scales away from human effort back towards God. The secret, it's not better strategy, it's obedience. Because when you are surrendered to the Lord and obedient to His word, the Lord's strategy becomes your strategy, flowing from His word and not from your own heart and mind. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude towards me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. Can you hear Jacob's language starting to change? He's beginning to give credit where it belongs, to God. And now he's bringing his wives up to date on what the Lord has been revealing to him all along the way. Verse 8, if he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. And so then we come to what we read earlier about Jacob sharing his vision from God with his wives. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and I saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob. I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flocks are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Remember what we saw last week? God isn't just at work breaking Jacob. He's breaking Leah and Rachel as well. Now they know what God has been teaching their husband Jacob. Now they understand why he wants to move 500 miles away. And even though Jacob isn't perfect, though he still wrestles between trusting his own strength and strategy, he is just beginning to obey. For the first time, he's standing up as the spiritual head of his home. The question is now simple and weighty. Will his wives follow his lead? Verse 14, then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. No, Jacob isn't perfect. Yes, he still struggles, sins, manipulates, and makes mistakes, even while trying to obey the Lord because he's human. But it's the step towards obedience that means everything. And notice where his wives place the credit. They don't point to Jacob's cleverness or strategy. They point to God. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you to do. That's a turning point. When obedience begins to take root, the credit shifts from human effort to the hand of God. Can you see the power of God at work here? He takes flawed attempts and imperfect strategies and still accomplishes his will, not only shaping Jacob's heart, but the hearts of Leah and Rachel as well. And that's the big lesson of this passage. God is bigger than our struggles and imperfections. He knows your heart because He created it. He loves you because He created you. You are His precious child. And just as I treasured my daughter's imperfect drawings more than a Picasso, God values your sincere efforts to obey Him, even when you fall short. We don't have to be perfect because Jesus is perfect. His death on the cross paid for our imperfections and our outright sin. So maybe you feel flawed. Maybe you struggle with sin. Maybe you don't feel good enough, or you feel like you always mess it up. Well, here's the invitation. Take a step of obedience anyway. Trust that God can still work even when your obedience isn't perfect, because His love, mercy, justice, and grace are.